Hey guys, I'm JVL. It's Tuesday again, and today I am joined by Dan Pfeiffer, who needs no introduction, but he is the guy who was the brains behind the Obama administration, one of the founders of PodSave, and most importantly for our purposes, he runs the Message Box newsletter here on Substack, which I think I want to say I subscribed to that on day one,
Well, I
maybe. I
appreciate that. I appreciate
I
that.
was not your I'm sure I was not your first subscriber. I'm sure, like, you had some friends and family who you had
My
given
mom,
a
probably my mom. Yeah.
yeah, but I bet I was,
Hmm.
employee number 95 or something
Well,
on that.
well, I love that.
I've been reading you now for years on that stuff. Uh, so I guess we'll just start with the most fun stuff. Dan and I emailed last night. We're like, "What are we gonna talk about?" And he said, "Yeah, well, whatever insane thing has happened between now and then."
Yeah.
And, I guess the most insane thing is that the United States, uh, our country,
Yeah.
so done in our names, at the United Nations sided with Russia, Belarus, and North Korea
Yep.
against our allies in Europe on a resolution on the Ukraine war. Did you think that Trump was going to switch sides? Because this is a thing I did not. I sort of pride myself on being able to see around corners.
Yeah.
And I expected Trump to try to break NATO and do all sorts of bad stuff. But I thought what he was going to do was really just retrench behind isolationism in America first. And that is not what we've gotten. We've
No.
gotten is that America has actually switched sides.
Yeah.
Um, did you
No.
did you see this coming?
No. Same to you. I thought he would probably be overly generous to Russia in some sort of Ukraine negotiation to end the war in Ukraine. I thought that he would use leverage, essentially the leverage of our aid, to push Ukraine to the table to take a deal it doesn't necessarily want. But to do it so explicitly, so quickly. And I think the thing that is perhaps, maybe this is deeply naive on my part, but the part that is probably so shocking is there's no pushback from the Republican Party on this.
No.
Right. This was the one place in Trump's last administration where there was still a block of Republicans who sort of tied his hands. You remember in 2017, one of the first things that the Congress did in a bipartisan fashion was they passed a bill that for with a veto-proof majority to prevent Trump from unilaterally taking down the sanctions on Russia for interfering in the election.
Right.
And just like there was still this emerging this like Reagan-esque neocon Bush era wing of the Republican Party that prided itself on a view of the America being a bulwark against democracy, standing up against Russia of all people, and to have so explicitly done it and so easily with someone like Marco Rubio leading the way is, I think, so it's certainly disorienting and obviously incredibly alarming.
Yeah, I mean, what I think about is I don't know if you remember. There's a moment where I want to say it was 2018, where Trump wanted to betray the Kurds. And so he
Yeah.
was like going to cut off aids to the Kurds.
Yeah.
And a bunch of Republicans like Lindsey Graham got in his ear and were like, "Oh, sir, you can't do this," with tears in their eyes. They said, "Sir, you can't do this." And he backed off of it. And now those guys they are nowhere to be seen. JD Vance is right there, in Munich telling telling our allies to get bent. And I don't know, I just wrote about this today. The idea that we are pushing Germany to become a nuclear power, basically. This move makes it all but certain that Germany will have to acquire nuclear weapons. At the same time that a neo-Nazi party has just doubled up its support and gotten 1 in 5 German voters over the weekend. Like, I don't like is was everybody just born 5 minutes ago? Does nobody remember the last century? It seems like a terrible idea.
Yeah, it is like sometimes the scale of the change that's happening before us is like so hard to fathom because it's so big.
Yeah.
And this is my colleagues Ben Rhodes and Tommy Vitor made this point on their Pod Save the World podcast right after Trump began the negotiations with just Russia on the war in Ukraine, and is that this isn't just like sometimes there are dramatic shifts in approach between administrations, right? Like Bush to Obama was a huge shift, right? Certainly as it related to the Iraq War. Obama to Trump was a huge shift. Trump back to Biden was a huge shift. But this is not a shift from Biden to Trump. This is or from Republican to Democrat. This is a shift away from the very principles that undergirded American foreign policy for
Yeah.
a century now, basically since World War One, and it is a just like the consequences of that. Like the point you made today in your piece about Germany needing a nuclear weapon because they know the guarantee of security from the United States no longer exists, or they certainly
Yeah.
have reason to be. They to not be confident in it.
You can't
Changes
make
things.
long range plans, right?
Right. Totally
Yeah.
changes the dynamics in the world about how you think about everything. All of the international institutions have been built around these two poles, the United States and the Soviet Union and now Russia. And you were sort of on one side or the other. And that's got a little more complicated since the fall of the Soviet Union. But the United States was the basis for which all of this existed. And if we are not going to play that same role, not have the same principles, not stand by allies in the same way, then the whole world order as we've understood it for 70, 80 years now is kaput.
Yeah, and I mean, I think people maybe don't understand this, that the American foreign policy establishment certainly had a left and a right over the
Yeah.
last 75 years. But there was actually very little daylight between the left and the right, and they were on goals
Yeah.
almost completely aligned.
Yeah.
And so the differences were about means. And so there was some, to the extent to which Dems were occasionally conceived of as being slightly more dovish in pursuit of like the victory in the Cold War, but like the idea was to win the Cold War,
Yeah.
right? And same with war on terror stuff after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So, but this is a wholesale difference. And what's funny is again, the foreign policy establishment is still fairly united. Like,
Right.
the conservative form. What's happening here are not people who are actually part of foreign policy. It's like Elon Musk and JD Vance and Donald Trump just doing stuff. And the problem is that once the seal is broken, you can't remake it.
Yeah.
We could reelect in 2028. God, we could get some candidate who is a combination of John McCain and Scoop Jackson, and they can be the most hawkish internationalist, pro-Western president ever. And it wouldn't matter from Europe's perspective because they would look at that and say, great, that's nice for now, but we've now seen that the Americans can elect a guy like Trump, and so we can't plan on their support anymore.
Yeah.
And that's that's bad. Those sorts of things take decades to rebuild.
Yeah, it was
Um,
really just sorry, it was just really easy for them to believe. I think as a lot of us did, that you could argue that Trump 1.0 was an aberration, right?
yeah,
He fell ass backwards in the presidency. He didn't win the popular vote. One of five things happens differently in the last 30 days of that campaign. Hillary Clinton gets elected, things stay the same.
right.
But now and then we got through it and Biden won, but now that it's happened twice, they'll never believe again that this was a one-off for the United States.
And they shouldn't.
Yeah, it should
Right? I
not.
mean, it just yeah. This is like if you are sitting in the foreign affairs ministry in Paris or in Brussels, um, you you can't make plans like that. All right. So we've got a bunch of Doge stuff happening. I think we have confirmation now of what we suspected was that Elon Musk is feeding a bunch of the data he's getting into his AI. So
Yeah.
he's using the federal government's data to train his LLM,
Yeah.
which is great, I guess. Super cool. And so my colleague Sarah Longwell had Kara Swisher on
Yeah.
her podcast over the weekend. And Sarah said to Kara, like, is this stuff even legal? And Kara just laughed at her.
Yeah.
It was like, what does that matter?
Yeah.
Like, of course it's not legal, but it's happening. And this is the world we live in now where laws don't really exist, right? We saw this yesterday with who was a Republican congressman who had domestic abuse call on him a couple days ago, and the DC district attorney yesterday put out a statement and was like, "Yeah, we're not going to investigate this."
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
It's
Oh,
like,
okay,
yeah.
that's how this works now.
Yeah.
Where are you on your level of Musk alarm?
Quite high. Quite high. I mean, look, I think this is another thing where the change before us is so big that it's like hard to fathom, but like we are like fully into Russian oligarch like involvement in our government, right? We have the world's
Yeah,
richest man running around in our government, decimating the agencies that regulate his companies without any regard to any of the impacts on anyone else who's involved. You have there are clearly no checks on power. There's not a single Republican member of Congress who will publicly stand up to Musk because he has so much money that he can fund the most expensive House primary challenge in world history with the coins in his couch cushions,
Yeah.
and so everyone stays quiet. Right? It's the only people who feel like they can ever do anything that upsets Trump slash Musk because they're sort of one and two sides of the same coin right now are people like Mitch McConnell who are not going to be in elected office ever again and have no designs on any sort of career after elected office. Right? You have to be in the twilight of your career in life to feel comfortable doing it. Or you even have
I mean,
people
Susan
like
Collins could do it. She just
she,
chooses not to, right? I
right?
mean, this is the idea that, like, I don't know, Susan Collins.
Mm,
If Susan Collins was no longer a senator
yeah,
after 20, well, then who the fuck cares? Like,
yeah,
there are worse things,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And she was like would think about it in a like more strategic fashion. She'd probably be more likely to be a senator if she actually had the courage of her convictions to stand up to. She could take the heat to stand up to Trump, but she doesn't, and therefore won't. And yeah, it's real. It's quite alarming. It is quite alarming, and just the it's like there is Musk's involvement, and there's what Musk is doing, and we're just like without any regard to outcomes, efficacy, victims, just running through government, shutting things down in a purely chaotic and incompetent fashion. And the government exists for a reason. There are things it does to protect us, right? It helps ensure that
Yeah,
our planes land on the ground right side up, right? It helps ensure that if there is another pandemic coming, we are ready for it. It helps ensure that if natural disaster happens, we're going to be able to help people find housing when their houses are destroyed, and all those things are going away. And we've seen the consequences of this before. We saw it after Katrina, and that was on such a smaller scale than this in terms of the damage done to government from the inside. Here, you like there are consequences for these actions, and it it does feel it's just like there you can't do all the damage that Musk is going without there being real impacts on real people very quickly and in potentially cataclysmic ways.
so I mean, it'll be felt first in the DC area. And yesterday, Glenn Youngkin, who's the governor of Virginia,
Who's
lot of
term
population,
limited, mind you? Yes.
right, term limited. So he had his little press conference where he basically was like, "Yeah, it sucks to be separated from your employer, but like whatever, you got to do it."
Yeah.
And it's a weird thing to see him having no interest in his constituents or in the economy of his state, but rather in like supporting Trump. And I guess this is my first question to you: is it possible that the Republicans could weather bad outcomes? Like, if we're in the fuck around find out phase and we've
Yeah.
we've moved to find out, what are the odds that Republicans are really gonna pay a political price for this? Because this is one of my big fears, is that
Yeah.
Trump is gonna figure out a way to shovel out money to his people. And so, like, if you are a soybean farmer who is hurt by tariffs or hurt by the USAID going away because USAID is no longer buying your soybeans, well, he'll just shovel $4 billion out the door in emergency relief to take care of you and make you whole. Is that
Yeah, that's possible. I think it's worth understanding that in a time of high polarization, of which we are in, political outcomes are and political accountability happens on the margins. All right. So if that
yeah?
soybean farmer in which you're talking about is someone who, when they are planting their crops, is wearing a MAGA hat, that person's probably not leaving Trump. It's just like people's primary identity is their political identity, and they are probably Trump not just because they think Trump is best for the bottom line, although they may believe it. They just have a view about what Trump does for the culture, the world, other things they care about. But if that soybean farmer voted for Joe Biden in 2020 or voted for Obama twice and then a third party candidate in 16, Biden, that person may be willing to switch. And I like political accountability will come in the midterms, right? And Democrats have as good a chance as we sit here today, even with Trump's numbers where they are right now, taking back the House as we've had in a very long time. Certainly, as we are this far out, a much better chance than we had at this point looking in 2017, like in the 2018 elections. The margins are narrower. Our coalition has become, thanks to all of the Bulwark Republicans who've joined us, become very good at turning out in midterms. the history of presidents in their first midterm or second midterm in Trump's case is not particularly strong. So I think he can pay a real price for this. Is it going to be cataclysmic? Probably not. Like I don't know that we'll see a world where Trump's numbers look like George Bush's did at the end of his term, right? Where people will
Right.
all just abandon because the
Well, he's
world
got a
is
floor,
different
right?
there. What's that?
Yeah. He's got a floor.
Yeah, he has a higher floor, and a lower ceiling, right? Like it's worth noting for all of his political strength and bravado, his net approval rating at the beginning of his presidency was 43 points lower than Obama's at the same time, and 15 points lower than Joe Biden's, right?
Yeah.
Who won a much narrower victory in 2020, at least a slightly narrower victory in the electoral states than in the battleground states than Trump did.
So let me ask you a couple Democrat questions. And I understand that I'm going to ask you either or questions, but
Yeah,
the answer is both,
yeah,
right? The answer is like I'm framing it as either or just for the purposes of having a generalized discussion,
yeah.
not both. The first one is: do Democrats need a forward-looking message going into 2026, or can they just try to highlight over and over how terrible things are?
I think that they do not need a forward-looking message until the summer of next year. And that forward-looking message should fit on a note card. It should look like Nancy, like the contract for America thing is always sort of a tired cliche, but it worked in 2006. We took the House back under similar circumstances, which is we had 6 for 6. Here are 6 things we're going to do if we get power back. But mainly, this is going to be about Trump, chaos, corruption, potentially huge cuts to healthcare to pay for tax cuts for billionaires, cuts to government services,
Recession, maybe.
recession.
Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
the fact that costs have not come down, all of those things. It's going to be mostly about Trump. So it's probably 80-20. Now, do we need as a party over the long term, medium term, need a vision for what we are offering the country in a 2028 presidential election? Absolutely. But that is like a project that has to happen kind of like as a sidecar to the most important thing, which is taking the House back, ensuring Trump passes no more
right.
laws, and having the ability to do some sort of investigation into everything that's happening in there.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And then the other question I have is a theory of the electorate, which is, and again, the
Mm.
answer is both,
Yeah.
right? It isn't like you pick
Yeah.
one of these and you see the other. But where is there more room to grow? Is it on flipping voters, like former, red dog Democrats, as our buddy Tim Miller calls them, or red dog? Yeah, I guess he calls them red dog Democrats, former Republican types, the Liz Cheneys of the world.
Yeah.
Or is it on turning out more of the people who didn't vote? Because there are a bunch of Democratic voters who just didn't show up in 2024. Um, where I guess I'm asking where, without any value judgment, purely as a X's and O's, where is there bigger upside for the midterm election for
The mid
Dems,
the
which is
midterm is going
different
to
than the general, right? Because it's different electorate in
the
midterms.
midterm is in persuasion. It is, and it's not necessarily red dog Democrats because I think the ideological sorting here is so screwy under Trump because it could be you know former Republicans, Liz Cheney types, whoever else, but it also can be some of these Gen Z voters who voted for Trump this time around and then he didn't do what he said he was going to do, right? It could be some of these Latino and Black working class voters. In the midterms, it's going to be much more persuasion. It's worth noting that in it running, I'd have to go back and look at the exact numbers, but heading into the 2020 election, 70 there there was there were that's where we do some a lot of people voted for Trump, or a significant number of people voted for Trump in 2016 and a Democrat in 2018, and then came back around and voted for Trump in 2020. I think it was 3 out of every 4 of those Trump 16, Democrat 18 voters that ended up voting for Trump. But so in the midterms, there are a lot of people who, there's a natural American desire for gridlock, and so
Right.
for
Out
a check
party,
on
right.
power, right? And
Yeah.
so, like persuading those people to vote for a Democrat who is a check on Trump more than they're like sort of a generic check on Trump as opposed to like a person who will embody the presidency and all these other things. That's an easier persuasion target. Again, the math gets more complicated when you get to 28.
Yeah. And 2026 also, I mean, the trade that we have made between the two parties now favors Democrats in off-year elections,
Yeah,
right? This
big
is
time.
just higher education levels. Like those voters turn out more in midterm elections
Yeah,
than,
right.
um,
It's the exact flip from 2010, 2014. Basically, the
yeah.
longest of the Republican Party.
Do you read Michael Podhorzer
I do. I
much?
do.
Yeah, I was struck by. I mean, he started ringing the alarm on this election. I want to say like early summer, and he was looking at numbers just on. He was concerned about Democratic turnout, and the number he kept obsessing about was uh, non-voters didn't seem alarmed by Trump.
Yeah.
And so he was worried the Democrats weren't doing a good enough job disqualifying Trump
Yeah.
for the group of non-voters who were about to become first-time voters. And that is something which doesn't weigh as heavily for 2026, but also it speaks to our, can you go purely with a negative message
Yeah.
versus you have to have a
This is
forward-looking, this is what we stand for thing.
yeah. This was a hard 2024 was not a great test of this because normally by the time you get to the general election, the one of the nominees has spent the previous year and a half defining themselves
Right.
on the national stage, and we had to run this campaign where the Harris people had to do two things simultaneously. They had to run their contrast campaign against Trump and also define Harris before Trump could define her, a race they ultimately did not win. But I think there was this real view, particularly among some of the Democratic super PAC community, that negative ads didn't work. That people knew everything there was to know about Trump, and I think that probably in hindsight was incorrect. We actually saw some like really interesting research that showed that I think this was Blueprint, the Democratic Research Organization did. It showed that these voters under 30 remembered almost none of the bad stuff about Trump because they were so young and they weren't paying attention to politics, and so very fine
Yeah.
people standing with Putin and questioning our intelligence agencies. A lot of those things just that they had no knowledge of. The Access Hollywood tape, all that stuff, and so there was probably a campaign to inform them at least because they were a huge swing group that Trump was able to tap into.
Oh, the people are amazing.
Yeah.
God, I love the people.
Yes. Yes.
Hey, YouTube fam, if you want to support the Bulwark, the best way to do it is by becoming a YouTube Bulwark Plus member. The Bulwark is truly independent. We have no corporate overlords. We're not settling any dumb lawsuits with Trump. By joining, you help support our work, and you can get a bunch of perks right here on this platform. Ad-free content, bonus videos, live streams, and some emojis of me, which I guess some people want. So come join, come hang out, become a Bulwark YouTube Plus member, and I'll be seeing you in the comments. So behave.
So we're going to get a little AMA action in a
Yeah.
minute, but I want to run something by you.
Yeah.
I have seen a lot of hindsight looking at the Harris campaign and deciding that actually the Harris campaign screwed up a bunch of things. I don't think I necessarily believe that, and I wanted to run this past you. I mean, I feel like a lot of times you got to make these evaluations in real time, and you can't wait to see what the outcome is to decide, yes, they did a good job, right?
Yeah.
It's like saying, is it smart to go for it on 4th and 3? Well, let's see if they make it, right?
Right.
If they
Yeah.
make the first down on 4th and 3,
Yeah.
then it was a brilliant decision. If they didn't, it was a terrible idea. And I think as we were watching it, it seemed like it was a pretty good campaign, and like she was a pretty above average candidate in
Yeah.
terms of candidate quality. The themes she picked were pretty good. And again, like not to say nothing could have been better. Like lots of things could be better because everything can always be better. But at the end of the day, I don't think that loss is on her. I think it's on America. Is
Yeah.
that a fair judgment?
I agree with that. That's been my assessment that I can go through and nitpick certain tactical decisions they made. Right. You can say, should they have
Yeah.
run? I know their testing showed the response to the trans ads didn't work. Should they have done one anyway? Could her media strategy have been more aggressive and more innovative? Could she have been as omnipresent in the culture as Trump? Of course, she could have done more. But the bigger thing here was she was someone who started the race totally undefined with 100 days to go, running at a time of the highest inflation in decades amidst an anti incumbent surge globally while the incumbent president had an approval rating in the high 30s. Like it's just that's just it is the she could have definitely done things better, and we should try to learn from the things she did that could have done better or mistakes they may have made as a party for future campaigns. But This is not one of those campaigns, and there rarely are, frankly, campaigns where a set of decisions make a difference, right?
Right.
Are determinative in a presidential campaign. Like I always used to say that if you swapped the Obama '08 and the McCain '08 staff, you still would have gotten the same result, right? It wasn't that
Right.
we ran like I think we ran a very good campaign. I'm very proud of it. Maybe why we got 50%, but it's not that we
Yeah.
did all
Once
these things.
Lehman Brothers collapsed,
Yeah,
like Obama couldn't have lost that race if he had
yeah,
tried.
right. And the same thing was probably true in 2012, right? Like that was a closer race, and by the time we got to the final stretch, like I don't think putting Stuart Stevens and Tim Miller in my seat and me in their seat and David, switching David Plouffe. But like I don't think
Yeah.
that it's like presidential election are about big things, right? And there's just this tendency in the political press, people who talk about politics all the time, to make it be about people and decisions. That's easier to understand because something you can control. You can't control inflation from the campaign headquarters.
Yeah. Yeah. The dialectics of history, as we
Yes.
would say.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to get out of here shortly, but I wanted to do a little AMA with real. We're going to do our little dueling AMAs. I didn't do that last week because I had Ed Condon on, and he and I have been like IRL friends for forever. So I 3 questions each. I want to start by asking: is it true that you are a Quaker school kid?
I am. I went to Wilmington Friends School in Wilmington, Delaware.
Did you do any Quaker League sports? Did you play against Friends Select from Philadelphia in tennis or any of that
I
stuff?
played
No.
I played basketball and soccer in high school. We played a lot of Quaker schools. Westtown Friends a lot was a rival.
Yeah, Morristown Friends. Did you play against
I think we
Morristown
probably played
Friends.
Morristown Friends once or twice in some Quaker League tournaments, winter tournaments.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I went to Haddonfield Friends
Oh, there you go.
through 6th grade, so they
Yeah.
stop at 6th grade. But I was a Quaker school kid.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, I don't know what your experience with Quaker education was. I'm not Quaker. I'm Catholic. I fucking loved it.
Yeah. I'm
I
not
love
Quaker,
the
not Quaker,
Quakers.
but
It was
I loved it.
such a great education, and infinitely more valuable than literally every other. The first through 6th grade education I got at a friend's school,
Yeah.
more important than everything 7 through the graduation of college.
Yeah. And my mom
Love
was
the Quakers.
my mom was a teacher at Wilmington Friends, and so we have a
Oh, really?
yeah. And so she was a teacher there long after I left. She's retired now, but yeah, we have a lot of affection for Quaker education in my house.
Love the Quakers. Okay, your turn.
Okay, tell me in the shortest way possible how you and Sarah Longwell became friends, because you're often
Okay.
referred to each other as best friend.
Yes.
Let's go.
Yes. Okay. So the origin of this is the Weekly Standard was getting closed down around me, and I was scrambling to find jobs for all the kids on my team. So I ran digital at the Standard, and I had a bunch of like 22 to 30-year-olds who worked for me, and I was trying to get them all gigs. And a friend of mine said, "You should call this woman Sarah Longwell. She's really good at helping people find stuff." And so I called Sarah, and I was like, "You don't know me, but I got to find jobs in a month for a bunch of people. Can you help?" And she did. She found jobs for like 3 of my kids, which was amazing.
Yeah.
And I wound up then, the Bulwark existed as like a static page of links, basically. And she wanted to build it out. I came on board to build it out and help her build it out. But it was a very like, I'm not staying. I'm not doing this. Like, I'm just helping you out. Right. It was like Wesley in the Dread Pirate Roberts and Princess Bride. I'll probably kill you tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I wound up staying. But the best friend thing started. She wanted to learn how to do podcasting. She was like, these podcasts that all the kids are talking about, how do they do them?
Yeah.
And so I said, well, the only really way to learn is just to do it. And so I dragged her into a broom closet, and we set up a couple mics, and we just started taping us talking. And I jokingly referred to as, I'm here with my best friend, Sarah Longwell, because the thing is, we barely knew each other at all. So that is how we became friends. And
great.
I am now more fiercely protective of her than basically anybody in the world.
That's
She's the best. Isn't she?
Yeah, she's great.
Don't you wish we lived in a world where Sarah Longwell could win elected office?
Yes, she could. She should run.
Oh, she's the best. All right. Tell me, who should the 2028 Democratic nominee be? And why should it be Mark Cuban?
Well, Mark Cuban did say he's not running, but people have said that before.
They all say that.
Here's how I will not answer that question. So after in 2004, my job was working for Tom Daschle when he lost to John Thune in that race. And so I found myself unemployed after helping the first Senate leader in a half century lose his job. And I was like, I have one more campaign in me and I want to do the presidential. And the entire CW, conventional wisdom, the Democratic Party was we have to get a moderate candidate from a red state who can win elections. And there were two people who fit that bill: Mark Warner, who I could not get a job with, and Evan Bayh, the senator from Indiana, who I could get a job with.
Evan Bayh,
And I
yeah.
went to go work for Evan Bayh, and we barnstormed Iowa, New Hampshire for 2 years. And because that's what everyone believed. Like Mark Warner was the toast of the town. Like
I remember
like
that.
he was the front runner on all of like the power polls in the beginning. And then we had, and that was the belief in 2005. And then by 2008, a guy named Barack Hussein Obama from south side of Chicago via Hawaii and Indonesia won the presidential election. So I want to stipulate we know nothing about what the political
Sure.
environment is actually going to look like. And whoever we think it should be is probably going to be something like the opposite of that. The argument for someone like Mark Cuban is there's a real argument for outsiders, right? Biden is actually of these last four elections, Biden is the exception, not the rule. Obama was an outsider, Trump's an outsider, so you've had outsiders win 4 of the last 5 elections. And the argument for an outsider is much greater now than it was even back then. People are even angrier about politics. They're more distrustful about politics. They're more distrustful of institutions in the media. They hate government. They hate Congress. And so, someone who does not have the stink of politics, who can seem like a reformer, is probably our best bet. And then the other thing is there's now, and the other thing about Obama and Trump is they were both very good at press and media and communicating and messaging and getting attention, right, in the media environment in which they
Right.
existed. And you need someone who can actually do that. And Cuban is very good at that. Are there others who might be very good at that? Absolutely. But Cuban on paper fits the profile of one way of thinking about, which is someone outside of politics who um, who has the ability to sit down in any forum with no matter how hostile the host, and handle their business, right?
It helps also that he has like a built-in cultural identity
Yeah,
too,
that's right.
right? I mean, this is being a famous person, and a famous person who is famous for being like good at business because he was on a TV show
Yeah, and good
is
at
an
sports, right?
asset.
And yeah,
Yeah.
the parallels to Trump, like in profile alone, not in personality, ideology, morality, etc., are quite like he's a successful business person who is famous for things other than the businesses that actually made him rich. He's famous
Yeah.
for Shark Tank, and he's famous for owning an NBA team winning a championship with, and being the most famous NBA owner for a very long time.
Yeah, and he really is almost like an inverse Trump because
Yeah.
he was kind of a dickwad when he was young. I feel like. Like I feel like the early Mark Cuban was an unpleasant character.
If you
He's
were an NBA
actually sort of
referee, he was, yes.
yeah, and he's sort of grown into being like a more serious, like I don't know, solid citizen,
Well, he's grown and matured like a human, right?
like
Like
a
people
human,
often do. Yes. Trump is frozen
not a
in amber
sociopath.
from like he's been the same probably since he was 6. And Cuban has like grown and learned from his mistakes and learned things and matured and all the things that normal humans do.
Let me throw this at you. Tim Biden is going to be like Tim Biden. Joe Biden is going to wind up being like Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan, I believe, was the last college senior drafted first overall in the NBA,
Yeah.
and is a thing that will never happen again. And Joe Biden, like 40-year career politician with a giant good boy politician resume, last person ever be elected president.
Yeah, it's going to be the one interesting thing, and I know we have other questions to get to here, but the interesting test here is going to be it is possible that Trump shits the bed to the point that whoever wins the Democratic nomination is going to be the next president of the United States, right? Like
Oh,
that is very possible, and then you could end up with someone who like I don't think it's going to be a 40-year. It's not going to. I
right.
don't even know who the example. It's not going to be Chuck Schumer or whatever. Someone who's been in Congress for 40 years, but it could be someone with a more traditional political resume, like a Gretchen Whitmer, a Josh Shapiro, a Chris Murphy, someone like that, because just like the reaction to Trump won was an institutionalist. The other thing Biden had going for him was he was well known and had a brand heading into an election, so it was harder to destroy him through the media and paid media. But you could a Democrat, we could win the old way this time. Now, I always tell people go look at the census numbers for what the 2032 map's going to look like, and we're going to need things get very bad very quickly when California, when Florida and Texas gained 7 points, 7 electoral votes, and sorry, Florida and Texas gained 7 electoral votes potentially, and California and New York lose 7.
Mm,
Uh,
great.
you can't win with the same coalition we currently have 8 years from now, and so you have to think big that way.
All right, your turn.
In your Wikipedia page, okay, it says that according to Tim Miller, had Jonathan Last gone to a less competitive college, he would have been a doctor. True or false?
I mean, I think true. I think I would have gotten into medical school if I had gone to a less competitive college. My MCATs were on point. It was my GPA that was not great, and that's
Yes.
because I went to a school idiotically that
Yes.
still adhered to like 1950s grading standards
Oh no,
and
no grade inflation.
no grade inflation. Which, again,
And that
like the
was
things you
John
don't
Hopkins.
know.
Is that John
Yeah,
Hopkins? Yeah.
yeah. Is there's a big conservative like, oh, grade inflation is terrible, and I hate that argument, and I always have, because I think once the cost of college becomes, and the good of college is just basically credentialing, then not grade inflating is like intentionally poisoning your customers if you are a restaurant. And
Right.
your job is to help your kids and help your customers. And so if you give them some cockamamie grades where you're curving everything to a C minus, then fuck you, college. Meaning fuck you, Johns Hopkins.
Yes,
God, the
there you
worst
go.
4 years of my life.
Yeah.
All right. So I was gonna ask you to name a Democrat who could fit in at a WWE event whose name did not rhyme with Betterman.
Mhm.
But I'm gonna switch that around. Is it important that Democrats find somebody who could like show up at Survivor Series or the Royal Rumble and fit
I
in with
don't.
that?
I don't know that it
Or does
has
that
to
not
be.
matter?
I don't think it necessarily has to be the Royal Rumble or UFC, but it has to be able to fit into the culture outside of politics in some way, shape, or form. Right. One of the
Yeah.
first things Obama did before he announced for president was he appeared on Monday Night Football.
Yeah.
He did his bracket every 4 years on ESPN. You just have to be able to talk about things other than politics. You have to relate to people on a cultural level, which helps defang the caricatures of you. And so it can be, can you sit around and talk about sports? Can you talk about movies and TV shows? Can you just relate to people on a human level authentically, naturally, where it's clear to people you're not faking it, right? It's like you actually know something about it, you care about it, you're having a conversation like you are in a sports bar. Um, like something like, or at at a happy hour or whatever else. And I think if we're going to pick one Democrat who can clearly do that, who would fit in, I think, like culturally at some of the events you just talked about, it'd be Ruben Gallego.
Oh, very
He
good.
in his campaign, he that was how he ran his campaign. They did events outside of like Peso Pluma concerts. He would do Tuesday, I think it was called Tuesday Tacos, where they would go to construction work sites and serve tacos to the people who were coming off the shift at 8 a.m. or whatever time the overnight shift ended at some of these places. Just to like really just seem like a normal human with people. But you have to seem like it once you sit down with them, you have to be able to talk about something other than just politics, because people hate politics.
Yeah.
And every politician knows something about something else. They have these interests. They just feel so they're too risk adverse to actually talk about them like a human. Like to
Yeah.
say they like poll test their favorite shows, right? Not they don't actually run a poll, but it's like in their head, they're like, what shows can I say? Like I remember Obama in 2008, TV Guide did what are your favorite shows? And he said The Wire, which was wildly controversial in
Right.
2008 for a black presidential
Stringer
candidate.
Bell. Yeah.
Yeah, to pick a show about heroin dealing in Baltimore. But it was just like that was his favorite show, and he could actually talk about it like a normal fan. And so, like, I think we're trying to like overlearn less. Like Trump went to UFC, so we should go to UFC. But if that person was going to sport like football games or basketball games, or was doing a podcast where they were breaking down the latest episode of White Lotus or Survivor, something you and I were talking about before we came on air,
Yeah.
like that would help relate to people.
All right, you get the last question here.
Okay. Let's see. My third question was who we should. You know what? I'm going to flip it on you because this was my third question. Who do you think the 2028 Democratic nominee should be if it's not Mark Cuban?
Yeah, I so one thing I say that gets Sarah very, very mad at me is
Yeah.
that I think the Democratic voters are highly unlikely to nominate a woman for president in 2028, and that is a completely understandable concern among Democratic voters. And I look, this is a thing that 10 years ago I would have said, no, you're crazy. Like, Americans won't mind electing a woman. Like, a woman is a perfectly viable candidate. Like, this country is not super misogynistic. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think this country is pretty misogynistic. is and like, I don't know. Like, Donald Trump is a terrible human being, and voters picked him twice. I don't know what else to. I mean, there are lots of explanations, but one of them certainly has to be misogyny and just among certain parts of the electorate. So I think it's probably be like, I think you probably should have somebody who's outside of politics. And I think it probably has to be a celebrity. This is the other thing that I worry. So I am at heart a neoliberal. Like, Joe Biden was almost my beau ideal as a president. Love it. Love Joe. Big Joe super fan. Um, I am concerned that Democrats will find that there are a lot of votes to be had by doing some version of demagoguery, because the American public, it turns out, is pretty crappy. And the answer may not be like, Mayor Pete, right?
Yeah.
I would love to think that the answer is, well, if we just run a dynamic Mayor Pete kind of candidate, then they'll win. I mean, what if the answer is running somebody who is preaching like really ugly class warfare, and it turns out that there's a lot of votes in that? Like, what happens if it turns out that you need somebody to help bring a bunch of anti-vaxxers back into the Democratic tent, which is the thing that used to happen. Like, I mean, so anti-vaxxers used to be split between the crazy tinfoil hat right wing and then the crazy hippie anti-GMO left wing, and all of those people have now consolidated on the right, and all of the like normie neo-lib people like me have consolidated onto the Democratic side. It turns out that was a very bad trade, just in terms of numbers, right?
Right.
And so what if you need, and so this is one of the things I worry about, right? I have the things that I like and the things that I think would be good for America, but I do worry that those things maybe can't create a national majority in 2026 or 2028 America. Is that unfounded? Is that
I mean, no, I don't think anything is unfounded in if Trump has just won an election, right? Where he won the popular vote. Like everything should be on the table in terms of analyzing
yeah?
it. And I believe, and this is maybe my own biases, my own naivete. I believe that the response to what we've seen from Trump is going to be someone who can paint the opposite picture of America, right? Someone who can who can. If we're going to exit, however, if we survive the next 4 years, we're going to exit it exhausted, angry, divided, frustrated. Um, and is there someone who can call us to our better angels, who can speak to like a different vision, right? Who can be popular? Now, you have to be a good politician. You have to be tough as hell to survive in this media environment. You have, like, I'm not against well-founded demagoguery about corruption and corporate influence and all those things. I think because that is like there is class warfare, and then there's the accurate depiction of the fact that we have huge corporations basically engaged in a legalized bribery scheme to win favor with our current president,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And we have the world's richest man rooting through our government. We have whatever it is, a dozen billionaires working in a government that is in an administration that's not wants to give a bunch of tax cuts to those exact same people. Like I think we should be able to that our nominee should be able to express legitimate, real, righteous anger about those things. Like, so you don't have to be You don't have to be soft. You don't have to go high when they go low. All of that. But I think the vision that you paint, that person paints, can be something that is um, inspiring and unifying to the majority of this country. Right? It just like maybe that's gonna maybe that won't work. But I do believe that is still possible because people are angry about politics, and there are still a lot of people in this country who want something better. People, they took a bet on Trump. They took a
Yeah.
bet on Trump for eyes wide open. Right? They're not bad people. They're not bad people. They're frustrated. They're financially strapped. Whatever else, and they made a choice about what they thought was going to be best for them, and it was a risk. And if that bet does not pay off, then
I
they
mean,
are
some of them are bad people.
so I mean, there are certainly some bad people, but I like to think about the people who legitimately wrestled
Sure.
with the decision about
Sure.
what to do at the end. And like, if you were someone who the system has not worked for you your whole life, or for the last 4 years, or since COVID, and you can't take care of your family, or you're struggling because the costs are up, and you just say, I need someone. I don't trust that this side's going to do it for me because they didn't do it the last 4 years. This other guy, he's terrible, but at least 4 years ago, I could afford to put food on the table. I understand, even if I just passionately disagree with it. I understand that calculus, and I believe that those we can win those voters back with arguments that are consistent with our values.
Man, I hope so, because this
Yes.
is again one of my constant trying to hedges against blind spots is I try to never assume that the things I like will turn out to be popular, and
Right.
I always worry that things I like are actually electoral poison.
Yep.
Dan, thank you so much for making the
This is
time.
fun.
If by any chance, if you are
Yep.
watching this and you are not subscribed to Messagebox, hit the button and
Thank you.
go subscribe to it. Again, I've been reading Messagebox from the very, very beginning, and literally day one.
No.
And I'm sure that if you're reading Messagebox, you're also doing Pod Save. But if not, go listen to our Pod Save bros. I love those
Yep.
guys, despite the
And
fact that they've never had me on the show.
well, we got to fix it. I guess you are the one remaining. We have to fill the set. So that's a good point. We've had
Yeah.
Sarah on a number of times. We've had Tim on a number of times. Okay, noted. I'm emailing our producers as soon as we get off of here.
All right, Dan,
All right.
thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Everybody
man.
else, we'll catch you next Tuesday.
Okay.
Thanks. Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.